Hey everyone, have a nice day. When Clint Eastwood walked into one of LA's most luxurious restaurants wearing just a simple polo shirt and slacks, nobody recognized the legendary actor and director. That's when an arrogant waitress made the biggest mistake of her career, trying to kick out and humiliate a man she thought was just some random older customer. What she didn't know was that Clint didn't just have a reservation, he owned the entire restaurant. What happened next became a Hollywood legend because, in true Clint Eastwood style, he turned this moment into the most unexpected lesson about respect that the restaurant had ever seen. It was a typical Friday evening at the Grand Oak. The recently renovated dining room buzzed with LA's elite, young tech moguls in designer suits, social media influencers capturing their gold leaf desserts, and old money families maintaining their weekly traditions. Among them sat a man in a simple gray polo shirt and casual slacks, quietly sipping whiskey at his usual corner table. Most of the veteran staff recognized him, of course. How could they not? But 6 months ago, when Clint Eastwood quietly purchased the Grand Oak, he'd given them strict instructions: treat him like any other customer. During his periodic quality checks, he believed the true measure of a restaurant wasn't in how they treated celebrities, but in how they treated everyday people. Rachel, the restaurant's newest waitress, didn't know any of this. Fresh from a prestigious hospitality school and building her own food influencer following, she'd spend her shift alternating between fawning over social media personalities and casting disdainful glances at the underdressed man in her section. Thomas, the longtime manager, watched nervously from across the room. He'd seen that look in Rachel's eyes before, the same look she'd given last week to a retired surgeon who dared to wear loafers instead of formal shoes. But tonight was different. Tonight, her judgment would carry consequences she couldn't imagine. As Rachel's clicking heels approached Clint's table, Thomas held his breath. The veteran staff tensed, recognizing the calm before a storm. The quiet man in the polo shirt just took another sip of his whiskey, that familiar half-smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Rachel positioned herself at the table, iPhone partially visible in her apron pocket, her practiced smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Sir, I couldn't help but notice you've been nursing that house whiskey for quite a while now." Clint looked up, meeting her gaze with the same steady calm that had faced down countless Hollywood executives over the decades. "It's a good whiskey," he said. "Perhaps," Rachel continued, her tone dripping with fake concern, "you'd be more comfortable at the bar. We're expecting several reserve parties at this table." She gestured to the pristine white tablecloth, which was typically for our dining guests. A young busboy named Miguel, who immigrated from Mexico 2 years ago and worked tirelessly to support his family, overheard the exchange while clearing a nearby table. He knew exactly who the man in the polo shirt was. He'd seen every Clint Eastwood film with his father growing up. His hands tightened around the bus tub, fighting the urge to say something. "I'm comfortable here," Clint replied simply, taking another unhurried sip. Rachel's professional veneer cracked slightly. She glanced at her watch, then at a group of young tech executives waiting by the host stand. "Sir, our executive chef prepares a very exclusive menu." "The prices?" She paused meaningfully, eyeing his casual attire. "Reflect the caliber of our establishment." At the next table, an older couple who'd been regulars for 20 years shifted uncomfortably. The husband started to speak up, but his wife touched his arm, recognizing the look in Clint's eyes, the same look that had preceded some of cinema's most memorable moments. "I'm aware of the prices," Clint said quietly, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly tone that had commanded attention in countless films. "And the chef's work?" Rachel's smile vanished completely. Now, she pulled out her order pad with sharp, irritated movements. "Well then, sir, shall I explain our menu slowly?" Perhaps the last words carried a distinct jab at his age. Miguel, still nearby, couldn't stand it anymore. He stepped forward, his voice quiet but determined. "Miss Rachel, maybe I should get Thomas." "Stay out of this," Rachel snapped at him. "Go bus tables. That's what you're here for." She turned back to Clint, who had watched the exchange with particular interest in Miguel's attempt to help. "Now, sir, one last time." The tension in the dining room was becoming palpable. Other guests were trying not to stare, but the contrast between Rachel's growing agitation and Clint's unshakable calm was obvious. This isn't some diner off the highway. This is the Grand Oak. Perhaps in your day things were different, but now we have standards. Clint set his whiskey down slowly, deliberately. The movement was subtle, but somehow it commanded more attention than Rachel's outburst. A few of the older patrons recognized it, the same measured calm before some of cinema's most iconic moments. In my day, he repeated softly, one eyebrow rising slightly. Yes, your day, when people could just walk in anywhere, dress however they wanted, order the cheapest drink, and take up space meant for real customers. Rachel was fully committed now, months of bottled-up disdain for unfashionable customers pouring out. Times have changed. This is a luxurious environment for people who appreciate modern luxury. Miguel had stopped pretending to clear tables and stood frozen, watching the disaster unfold behind him. Thomas, the manager, was quickly walking over, having finally noticed the situation spiraling out of control. Modern luxury, Clint repeated. Thoughtfully, as if testing the words, Clint asked, and what exactly does that mean to you, Rachel? The mention of her name caught her off guard. She wasn't wearing a name tag, but she recovered quickly, assuming he'd heard another server use it. It means, she declared, understanding that some places aren't for everyone, our clientele expects a certain ambience. She gestured toward a group of young entrepreneurs taking selfies with their gold leaf desserts. They get it. They respect what the Grand Oak represents. They're not here pretending to be something they're not. The irony of her statement hung in the air. A few veteran servers exchanged knowing looks. Thomas was now just steps away, his face pale, pretending. Interesting choice of words, Clint mused, that familiar half-smile returning. Listen, Rachel snapped, her patience finally exhausted. I've tried to be polite, but you clearly don't belong here. This isn't some set for one of those old cowboy movies. This is a prestigious establishment, and I won't have you ruining the experience for our real guests. The moment the words left her mouth, Thomas froze mid-step. Miguel dropped his bus tub with a crash that echoed through the suddenly silent restaurant. The older couple at the next table audibly gasped. But Clint's expression didn't change. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a single call. Jerry, could you bring me the ownership papers? Yes, right now. And the renovation plans we discussed last week. He set the phone down and looked back at Rachel, who was starting to sense that something was very, very wrong. You see, Rachel, he continued in that same quiet voice, I've been coming here every Friday for the past 6 months, sitting at the same table, ordering the same whiskey. Want to know why? Rachel's face had begun to pale, the implications slowly dawning on her. Because 6 months ago, I bought this restaurant. Not for the prestige, not for the modern luxury, but because for 50 years, the Grand Oak represented something real, a place where genuine hospitality meant treating everyone with respect, regardless of what they wore or how many followers they had. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. You could have heard a napkin drop. Jerry, the restaurant's longtime accountant, appeared moments later with a leather portfolio. He nodded respectfully at Clint, handed him the documents, and stepped back, trying to hide a smile. Rachel stood frozen, her order pad hanging limply at her side. The reality of her situation was hitting her in waves, each realization worse than the last. She'd not only insulted a customer, she'd insulted Clint Eastwood. She'd not only insulted Clint Eastwood, she'd insulted her own boss, and not just any boss, but a living legend who'd built his career on characters who stood up against exactly the kind of arrogance she'd just displayed. Miss, Clint said, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly tone that had commanded respect across 6 decades of cinema. Let me tell you a story about this place. He gestured around the dining room. 50 years ago, I came here for the first time. Wasn't famous yet, wasn't anybody. Wore a shirt pretty much like this one. The owner back then, Old Man Thompson, treated me like I was the most important guest he'd ever had, not because of who I was, but because that's how he treated everybody. He paused, taking another sip of his whiskey. When his son wanted to sell the place, 6 months ago, I bought it for one reason, to preserve that spirit. Real class isn't about designer labels or social media followers. It's about dignity, respect, and treating everyone like they matter. Miguel, still standing nearby, straightened up a little taller. The older couple at the next table nodded approvingly. Even some of the young influencers had put down their phones, caught up in the moment. So Clint continued, fixing Rachel with that legendary steady gaze. The question isn't whether I belong here. The question is whether you understand what this place really stands for. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, reality crashing down around her, carefully constructed worldview shattering. But what happened next surprised everyone, especially her. I could fire you right now, Clint said, his voice gentler now, but that's not what this place is about. Instead, I'm going to give you a choice. He gestured to Miguel, who stepped forward nervously. This young man tried to warn you. He recognized me, not from social media, but because he watched my films with his father. He understood something you didn't. Respect isn't about appearances. Turning to Miguel, Clint spoke with quiet authority. Son, how would you like to start training as a waiter? We could use more people who understand what real service means. Miguel's eyes widened with disbelief and gratitude. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As for you, Rachel, Clint continued, your choice is simple. You can walk out that door and find another job at a place more focused on modern luxury, or you can learn from Miguel and our veteran staff about what real hospitality means. Your call. Rachel wiped her eyes, looked around at the dignified faces of the longtime staff, and made her decision. I'd like to stay and learn, sir, if you'll let me. Good choice, Clint nodded, finishing his whiskey. Thomas put Miguel in charge of her retraining as the tension in the room dissolved. The older couple at the next table began to applaud. Others joined in, not for the celebrity in their midst, but for the lesson they had just witnessed, a reminder that true class has nothing to do with clothes or status, and everything to do with how we treat each other. Today, the Grand Oak remains one of LA's finest restaurants, not because of its luxury, but because of its heart. And if you stop by on a Friday evening, you might just see a man in a casual polo shirt, sitting at his usual corner table, quietly ensuring that the old values of respect and dignity live on. Hey everyone! If you enjoyed this story about real class and timeless values, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments about a time when someone judged you wrong and how you handled it. See you in the next video.